Are you ready to master Angular? Oasis Digital offers Angular Bootcamp, a 3-day intense workshop class for individuals or teams. They cover Angular 4 and 2 and focus on the skills and knowledge you need for complex, data-rich applications. They also still offer AngularJS for teams supporting older projects. Bring them to your site or send developers to them in St. Louis, San Francisco, New York, DC, and other cities, and online at angularbootcamp.com. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Adventures in Angular. This week on our panel we have Alyssa Nicoll.
Hey.
Joe Eames.
Hey everybody.
I'm Charles Max Wood from devchat.tv, and this week we're going to be talking through why people are still on Angular 1. I thought it would be an interesting topic, and just to give a little bit of background, I was helping out with the local scouts because my son he just turned 12, but the 11-year-old scouts they all went to the pool, and so I went with them, and I wound up chatting with one of the leaders who works for Provo Craft, does stuff with the Cricket, if you're familiar with that. And anyway, he said that they were still using Angular 1 or AngularJS. And I was curious. I was like, well, why? And he was like, well, I don't know. But it got me thinking, how many other people are out there? I talk to, people on a regular basis that, they're still using Angular 1. They're still using AngularJS. And so I put a tweet up on December 6th to see what I would get. I got 41 responses, and so I thought we could just talk through it and see, okay, that might be a good reason to stay, or that might be a good, reason to move, or, what have you. So anyway, you guys ready just to dive in?
Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, who's going to be the AngularJS advocate, and who's going to be telling them that they're an idiot? We've got to have a Ward, and we got to have a Joe here.
I can take the JS side.
We're going to take the JS side. Okay. All right. If I don't hear the word idiot come out of your mouth at least 10 times during this episode, we're going to consider this a failure of an episode.
Because I wasn't a good enough impersonator?
Yeah. And I'm going to use the word dumpster fire at least 15 times.
Oh, I love it.
I was going to say, you have to convince Joe that Angular 2+ is a dumpster fire.
Yeah.
It's a dumpster fire.
Oh, yeah. You got to use the word dumpster fire.
Yeah.
Okay. So are we going to start off by reading some tweets, or how do we get going?
So the tweet I sent out was, if you're still using Angular 1.x, because that's the other thing I found is talking to people. If I say AngularJS and Angular, they don't get the distinction. It hasn't permeated the entire community. So I said, if you're still using Angular 1.x, I'd love to find out why you haven't moved to Angular 2+. This is not a you're doing it wrong. It's an exploration into a topic I'd like to cover on the podcast. And the first response, and I'm really curious to see what the reaction is our company has a lot of Angular 1.x expertise. Is that a valid reason to stay on Angular 1, or should they be moving up?
Because you have expertise?
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, it is essentially a new framework, and that's something that made me super sad personally, because I had started using AngularJS in college, and then I got hired on at a place to use AngularJS, and we were going to upgrade, but of course, that was a fairy tale. We never ended up doing it. And so I got really, really good at AngularJS. And so it's really hard to, especially for, I don't know, I can even see it in bigger companies, but especially for smaller companies where they just don't have the resources. I'm talking about they don't have the time to let their devs learn a new framework and switch things over. I could see it. I could see it as a valid point. You have a counterbalance to that, though, Joe?
Well, I mean, I actually do think it's a very valid point.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I always find it funny how fast things move. It's like, hey, this technology was great until we discovered a new technology, and now that technology is completely obsolete. It's horrible. Like, who would ever have even thought that was a great thing, right? Like, what's the current gen of iPhone? 8? No, X, right?
I think they released them both.
10. There's an 8 and a 10 that came out.
They did a Microsoft thing. They skipped 9. Okay, well, the 10. Let's go with the 10, right? I mean, you'd have to be. It's like Dark Ages to be using an 8, right? I think Laura Ingalls Wilder in Little House on the Prairie used an iPhone 8. How could you ever get along with an iPhone 8?
It's
right?
It
won't
even.
7. Oh, the 7.
Came
okay.
out this year too, but yes. So you're saying
7.
How could you get along with a 7?
How could you?
I have a 6 Plus.
Wait, what?
I have an iPhone 6 Plus. That's my phone. So I haven't upgraded to the 6S, the 7, the 8, or the X.
Oh, man.
I've kind of taken this a little bit farther away, but your question was specifically because if you have skills with AngularJS. So when I had to do some app for, I can't remember what it was. I needed a voting app. That's what it was. I was doing some lightning talk voting, and I hadn't worked enough with Angular at the time. I don't remember exactly when this was, about a year ago. And so I just wrote it in AngularJS. I know AngularJS. It's fast, it's quick, it's easy. I know where its problem areas are, right? So boom, I put it together. I threw it down, and it went well. Additionally, boy, I'm arguing the wrong side of the fence here really well. The other thing that's great about AngularJS is it's way more stable than Angular. So and that definitely relates to the expertise side, because even as you get expertise in Angular 2 plus, things are changing a ton, right? Like we're just going through some updates for ngdoc, or actually and a course that I'm doing where we're upgrading to 5.0, and all of a sudden it's a new version of RxJS, and RxJS has radically changed how they do things in their version 5.5, which has nothing to do with Angular 5.0. The numbers, I guess, are just incidental. But a bunch of radical changes. HTTP client has to change. Right. The CLI has to change. RxJS has to change.
Just much smaller changes, though, than, I mean, because we're talking an afternoon or, God forbid.
Not RxJS. No way. And certainly
that one, but I'm talking about just getting your app, like, you think it would take more than an afternoon to just get your app up from 4 to 5?
I guess it really depended on your app. Right, there wasn't necessarily much in the way of breaking backwards changes, but you get all those deprecation warnings, and all of a sudden you're like, oh.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the, compelling reasons, which again, I'll be arguing for the wrong side now, just like you did.
Swapping sides.
If you're looking towards the future, the Angular team has said as soon as the docs for, Angular are more used than the docs for AngularJS, they'll start to, wean people off of AngularJS, start winding down and essentially they're not promising to keep up with AngularJS forever. So it will go
I don't know why that matters very much. I mean, the community can certainly support AngularJS.
You think it could keep going?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, it runs fine. I'm trying to think of the last time I needed the Angular team to fix a bug for me in AngularJS. And I'll be honest, it's been a while. I have been since I've encountered an AngularJS bug that actually needed the core team to address the issue. In fact, any kind of a bug.
So you really think that
it's stable? What support do we need out of them? What support are they giving now that we even need? I mean, the people that are taking care of it, they're contractors. Now it's not even really the core team. I mean, granted, the core team is like overseeing it, but it's not even the core team who's doing the critical work on it. It's Peter Bacon Darwin and a couple of other people that are, I think they're all contractors. Right. They just work with the Angular team to make sure everything's right. But I don't know. We just kickstart enough money to pay Pete for his time, and I think we're fine. In fact, all of the features that they're adding, for the most part, I know that they do some critical bug fixes, but for the most part, the features they're adding are things that are going to try to bridge the gap between AngularJS and Angular a lot easier. So I think it's been a long time since the work that's gone since the release of 1.6, since there's been really anything that's gone in there that would matter to your typical developer. And even 1.6 was pretty small. 1.5 had a nice big change that we all appreciated.
I guess I always just imagine it wasn't so much of like, oh, I need them to make these changes for me, but it was just more of like, they're not working on it full time, therefore it might die. And like I don't know. For some reason, it was just the association in my brain of like the people who started it. If they're not supporting it anymore or using it internally anymore, then that can't bode well. But I guess you're right. I guess like the community could take it and do, as they would with it.
Well, I get
that's
the
not
fear,
a guarantee, but
Alyssa,
yeah.
But again, think about it past the idea of, oh no, the Angular team isn't like spending tons of time supporting AngularJS. What exactly do you feel like is happening that you're going to suddenly miss? Because that's my point is there's actually, you may or may not realize, people may or may not realize this, there's actually probably nothing going on right now that people are going to miss if they were to suddenly officially say we're no longer officially supporting AngularJS.
Yep. I'm going to stop you guys real quick. It sounds like somebody's splashing water.
Oh, sorry. My pup's over there playing with the fountain. And she's kind of blind. And so I don't know why, but she can't not keep her head out of the the water fountain. I'll move away from her.
It's all good.
I thought it was kind of nice and soporific, you know?
Yeah.
It's like sitting next to one of those little fountain things you put in your bathroom.
Oh.
Yeah, you guys would have put me to sleep for sure.
Uh-huh.
All right, so the next tweet was they're setting the stage for a possible migration to version 5, so they're coding in 1.6 using TypeScript. They're implementing best practices, but they're seriously considering Vue.js. And as you guys pointed out, it's kind of a different framework, so is there value in upgrading to Angular as opposed to upgrading to, say, Vue.js or React or something else?
I just feel like if you're looking at Vue, then honestly, the question is stay on AngularJS or go to Vue, because Vue is so much on the AngularJS side of the world versus the, Angular 2 and up side of the world, that I feel like if your company is seriously considering using Vue.js, they would be unhappy having to use TypeScript and having to, make the big upgrade. I feel like either way is a transition, like you're saying, to a new framework. But I don't know. I know the guy who created Vue, he left Google and he'd done multiple projects with Angular, and he had originally just started Vue because he wanted to see like if he could kind of wean down AngularJS to his favorite parts. And like literally that's how Vue was born. And so to me, if you look at like the Vue.js feature list, it's like, I think I made a joke in a like blog post I wrote recently, because I was like, the AngularJS, Vue.js feature list, because it's so identical and some of the verbiage is even the same. So I think, I don't know. Do you have anything to say to that, Joe? Because I can't imagine someone choosing between Vue.js and Angular, because they're just so different. I don't.
Right. From what I understand, Vue is a ton closer to AngularJS. So if you like that magic that AngularJS provided, of I slap a script tag on and I do a few little things and all of a sudden things are great. I don't know that I would hesitate to say you would hate TypeScript. I think that we should be pushing TypeScript or something similar on the community as much as possible, because man, once you get used to it, it fixes so many other problems. But Vue works fine with TypeScript. You can use Vue with TypeScript. But I mostly I agree with you. If you're heavily into AngularJS and you really want to avoid all these crazy build systems and complex things that's going on when trying to look at Angular, that Vue is going to feel a lot more familiar to you than Angular probably will. Now, John Papa wrote a very interesting series of articles examining the differences between Vue and Angular, so those could be certainly of help. But it's also, Vue is a pretty small thing, especially once you know AngularJS, to learn. So learning it and doing a little bit of testing it out with it, I think, is small and simple enough. Even for tiny projects, it's worth the time just to spike something out and see how you like it.
I thought it was us versus them with these frameworks.
Not over here, at least.
No, that makes a ton of sense.
I've never seen anybody in the community say that. Like, seriously.
No, I haven't either.
Have you?
No.
Like, seriously, because I keep hearing everyone being like, it's not an us versus them, but I don't know anybody who's on the other side of that fence who's like, it is an all-out war. So
I've encountered people that I feel like, whether they would ever admit that they live in that side of the world, definitely behave that way. And I think I've said this before, but I'll be very honest. I fully admit and realize that I have an unconscious bias against React. And I don't know why. There's no reason for that bias.
Oh, but like you actually...
I can tell. I could tell that I have it. If I look at talks where read comparison blogs on React versus Angular or something else, or if I listen to talks where they talk about it. I was just watching one of my really good friends, Corey House, his Pluralsight course on the React, the big picture. And he said a few things that I realized, I was like, wait a second, that's not right. And then I realized I was kind of getting frustrated with what he was saying. And then like, hey, I just pushed out my Angular, the big picture course on Pluralsight, and I said pretty much similar things, right? So I realized I've definitely got an unconscious bias going on. So I could see how that can bleed into conversations. And I assume and hope that a lot of that unconscious bias developed because I actually had several people who behaved pretty frustratingly on that same side to me. And so it's like, even if you aren't a big supporter of your hometown team, right? And somebody comes in and starts trashing on them, you end up like getting ready to fight, and you're like, wait a second, I don't even go to their games, right? I guess that's certainly not true of me. I definitely go to the Angular games. I'm an Angular guy, right? That's been my bread and butter for many years. But and a person who's particularly attached to one technology over another. But I had a couple of people that I dealt with in my life that kind of felt a sense of we're in that it's a religion, not a technology choice camp.
Okay.
And I had some problems with that early on. And I think that has created an unconscious bias that I'm like actively trying to ignore and compensate for in my life.
Yeah. No, yeah, I'm not on the war side, but I definitely feel the bias side because I have the same thing where it's really not necessarily React, but it's anything not Angular. And I know that I have that, and I try to overcompensate for it because I'm always like, yeah, but it's not Angular, and so I just try to keep that in mind. But I see what you're saying, Joe. What were you going to say? Sorry, Chuck.
No, it's all good. I see the same thing with politics, and I'm not gonna pick sides, but I mean both sides have done some things that I like, and so you see people just bagging on them for every little thing that they do, and they just have the jersey on. They're not actually engaging in real thought about, okay, what are they doing? Why are they doing this? And what will actually be the outcome on this?
Right.
It's my team versus their team. And obviously my team is better.
Yeah, I guess maybe at the end of the day, it's a bit of a human nature thing because we all like to put the jersey on and scream our lungs out. So
that's why God invented soccer.
Right. But there's been those funny studies where they've actually like tested people and told them that their candidate that they prefer said some things that was actually said by the other candidate.
Right. And
they'll defend those things, and then they'll attribute things that their candidate has said to the other candidate, and they'll condemn those things.
Yeah.
How funny.
Yeah, it's really funny.
This is your candidate's tax plan or whatever, right? And
So I definitely, I could see how like those same, I don't know, human qualities would trickle down to even things like programming and frameworks and languages. So
yeah,
none of us are immune, I suppose, but
yep. So anyway, it's definitely interesting though, just to see where all this comes in. And Vue is seeing a ton of growth too. So it's also an interesting conversation to have that way, why is it gaining ground? And what that really means for everything that we're doing. But
I do wonder if it's become, I don't know, if it's risen so much because it's so similar to AngularJS. Is it simply because of the wariness maybe built up in the Angular community? Because if you really loved AngularJS and then it was kind of pulled out from under you during the upgrade, I could see you being like, well, let's jump ship to something that's exactly the same, but not this. I don't know. I'm still trying to wrap my head around why someone would want to do Vue over AngularJS, but I haven't used it yet. So I guess I'm not super knowledgeable on that aspect.
Well, certainly one reason might be that like what you were saying before, it feels like the support for AngularJS is winding down when the support for Vue is only ramping up. Right. So you might look and say, hey, the future looks very bright for Vue. For AngularJS, I wouldn't say it looks dim by any means, but it doesn't have that same likelihood that there's going to be a significant amount of investment into it and growth in the community. So that would be certainly one reason. You might feel like it's still a more modern framework than Angular, regardless of the realities of the situation. The fact of the matter is AngularJS is old. So imagine if somebody were to come up and say, hey, I made this modification, this add-on to Backbone.js, and it is better than anything that's currently out there. It's better than React, it's better than Angular, it's better than Vue, it's better than Elm. What else is super hip right now? Right? Would you have a really hard time swallowing that because it's Backbone? I guess if the fact that they're selling, they added something onto it. But if maybe they said, hey, I'm using Backbone, turns out it's actually better than everything else, right? We're just going to come first full circle. Backbone's the best. And we should all go back to Backbone, right? You'd have a hard time just because it seems like it's older and dingier, right?
Yeah. But at what point when is it like, oh, this has been around for so long that it's tested and tried and true, right? Like, does that not happen?
Not in tech. No.
Okay.
That never happens in tech. We don't care if it's tested or tried and true.
We want to be stimulated.
Yeah.
I mean, it is a reality, and granted, that's not what this show's about per se, but it is a reality. I mean, people move on to new frameworks and new technologies because they want the challenge. Or because it sounds cool, or because it sounds fun, or because I'm bored with this old thing that I've been using forever that's not progressing at a really rapid pace. And so,
and I don't think it's fair to say that people don't take into consideration, tried and tested. But I think there's a simple way to indicate that your framework is tried and tested, and that is to take off the beta tag.
Yeah.
That it doesn't have to be tried and tested. You just have to make people you have to release 1.0, and then everybody thinks it is, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, literally look at the type of stuff that huge enterprises with major amounts of process behind adopting software and such, the kinds of software they're adopting nowadays compared to what they would have adopted back in the late 90s or the early 2000s, from like a Microsoft typical standpoint. The maturity of your average Microsoft product is so far beyond any product that we're now adopting. I mean, certainly front-end open source type product, right? Like they put so many more resources into fixing problems
right
back then. And we just didn't, the industry just doesn't care that much. Even the Six Sigma enterprises that have all these processes, people are still getting around them because we're still seeing these frameworks used by big companies.
Yeah, I'm going to push us into the next tweet. And we've already talked about some of this, but there's one big one that I'm curious on. And so he says, and this is Dino's tweet, if Dino's listening, TypeScript and costs of rewriting everything again just because Angular releases a version every few months, and due to big differences from 1 to 2 requires additional time to study Angular 2, even compared with other solutions that are available. So we've already talked about the differences between 1 and 2 and the cost of rewriting.
Right.
The other two issues that he brings up, though, are TypeScript. So if you're not using TypeScript, do you have to use TypeScript? And the other one is the release schedule for Angular.
I mean, back whenever they first... I don't know if you guys remember this, when they first announced Angular 2 and on their docs even, they had different paths and it was outside of TypeScript. So it'd be like, here's where our docs are going to live for Angular 2 plus and TypeScript. Here's where our docs are going to live for Angular 2 plus and CoffeeScript. And there was like, I think one for vanilla, and there might
it was ES5, one. ES6, and TypeScript.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and there was people talking, I think, about, oh, that means I could keep using CoffeeScript, and I was like, really? And so, yeah, I know, right? So, essentially it would have allowed for that. I don't know, honestly, if you can use anything. I personally wouldn't, just because everyone in the world is using TypeScript with 2+. I don't know. Have you guys heard of anyone not using TypeScript?
Oh my gosh, no. I mean, do not ever use Angular with anything but TypeScript. That was...
I don't know. I don't even know.
We realized long ago that was a bad... Yeah.
Well,
is not...
The thing that I'm seeing more than anything else is that when it was in beta, people would, pull it in, and we all kind of had to pull out our hammers and knock something together. And so knocking something together for ES5 or ES6 was just as hard as knocking something together for TypeScript. But now you have the Angular CLI, and it removes all those barriers for TypeScript, and it doesn't do a ton for the other environments. There's another tweet here, basically that says the same thing. Until now, there's a jump start for Angular 2 ES5, but even that's not great. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, you definitely want to do TypeScript. But so go back to his tweet. There was TypeScript, which I can get a little bit behind. But I think that for most people, the bridge between Angular, the TypeScript part is going to be one of the smallest pieces of making a jump to Angular. So and then he mentioned the churn, basically, that they're releasing new stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And then just the whole energy of just learning something new. That was kind of his 3 points, right?
Yep.
We certainly talked about the energy of learning something
and the cost
new.
of rewriting.
Cost of rewrites, which are significant. I mean,
Yeah.
I've done a significant amount of work on the whole migration story. I helped write the docs. I got 10 hours of video on Pluralsight on migrating from AngularJS to Angular. So I think I have a good handle on that. And I would agree that it's a big, complex beast. So, I mean, I think that that's a very valid tweet and concern. And the churn, even for me, the churn is frustrating and annoying. I had ng.io. It fell behind. We skipped 4 altogether. We went from 2 directly to 5 and skipped 4 because by the time I was ready for 4, 5 was already coming out. So I was like, we'll just go straight to 5.
Yeah, but the flip side is that Angular 2 to Angular 4 to Angular 5 is not as big a change as AngularJS to Angular. And so, I don't know. I don't know that the churn is really that big a deal unless you're using something they deprecate and then remove from version to version.
Well, yeah, but there's tons. Like if you're doing 2, you would have used the HTTP library. And then 4.3 came out with the HTTP client, and now it's deprecated in 5. And it'll be gone in 6.
Gotcha.
So you've got to switch off that. RxJS. If you're using 5, you're going to want to use the latest version of RxJS. And yes, that's not Angular, but again, it's like TypeScript. You've got 3 things that are radically versioning at a very fast pace. TypeScript, RxJS, Angular. Well, really 4. The CLI itself is having some pretty big updates. So you throw in Webpack in there. There's a lot of things that are changing, and none of them seem like they're significant. But I've had a minor bug fix revision of TypeScript actually break my AngularJS, and it was a very common problem. So there is a lot more churn than it really seems like from a high level. The Angular team is like, hey, we're going a full year, 12 months before we're going to mark it as deprecated and then remove it. So you get one whole version where you just simply marked as deprecated and a whole year, but a year is not a long time in the development world.
Yeah.
In the life of a project.
It sounds like it, but it really isn't.
No.
I mean, I launched ng.io at ngconf last year, which was in April of last year, right? So already, by the time I launched, it was practically out of date with version 4. And then we just got 5 now. You build it for a while, and then all of a sudden there's a new version coming out, and you don't want to take the time at the moment to do it because you're building features, so you don't upgrade. And then pretty soon you're 2 versions behind or 3, and everybody's complaining because you're not using the latest like the latest HTTP library. I feel like there is a lot of churn.
Churn. Can we just I don't know that term. I know butter, like churning butter. We just mean turnover when we say churn.
Yeah, like churn is like
butter on
activity,
a turnover is good.
Yeah, activity that's going on that may or may not directly relate to progress.
Oh,
right.
Wait, so it could be not look at all these cool new features, but it's just look at all this stuff I have to work on to have to keep up on feature parity.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or just so many things are now different, right? Just whatever it is, churn.
Yep.
Okay.
So Barry said it could have been a different framework. We've kind of addressed that. Alberto pointed out the problems with doing anything but TypeScript as well. He also says only recently the devs fixed the JIT part. And he has links in here to some of the GitHub issues.
Not sure exactly what he means.
Here, I'll post a link in the chat.
I mean, I assume what he means is that now you can run in development mode using the AOT. So that way you don't have to go through process of building, and then when you go to production, you find out, oh crap, I've got a whole bunch of stuff that doesn't work with the ahead of time compiler.
Yep.
So that might be what he's talking about. I mean, yeah, that was an issue, and that was an annoyance for me too. And even the current version of CLI doesn't do it by default. At least right now we're on version 5.1, and I don't know what the version of the CLI is, 1.6 or 1.5. And those you have to add in the AOT flag when you do your ng serve, but then you actually can see all the compiler warnings you're going to get out of the ahead of time compiler because it runs it every time.
Yep.
But yeah, that's an issue.
Yep. And then he also pointed out that they removed DSL decorators, which is something that he wanted. But
DSL decorators.
What is a DSL decorator?
DSLs are domain-specific languages.
Domain-specific language, yeah.
Okay.
The ability to create your own decorators? Is that maybe what he's...
I don't know. I posted the link, but I haven't actually looked at it.
Huh.
Okay. So they changed the way that you declare a class in TypeScript.
That hasn't... I don't know. Without spending a bunch of time or having somebody really explain on a depth, I'm not sure that I get it. But I guess if the point is, hey, there's some things that to me are pretty big things that have recently been changed, I can totally get that.
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, we're talking about a framework that's actively being worked on, it's actively having a bunch of features. We're getting schematics and elements right now that are big things. Elements doesn't necessarily change what people are actually doing. Neither really just schematics. It just gives you another feature set. It'll give you more capabilities with the CLI, but it's a lot of cool stuff. And people will, say, hey, why aren't we using the schematics in what we're doing? With elements, it's an entirely new kind of functionality. So schematics is the ability for the CLI to produce other things other than its default, right? So you can get it to produce classes the way that you want, according to how you like them produced, rather than the default, basically, template. You can write your own templates. In fact, with schematics, you could, for example, use the Angular CLI to produce a React application, because the CLI itself is really not that closely tied to actually being an Angular. Once you get rid of what the actual code that it outputs, if you could customize that code, you could have it produce React code. Or Ember or whatever. So that's schematics, where elements is the ability for Angular to produce a fully standards compliant web component that you could throw into any other framework, which I personally think this might be one of the biggest game changers we're going to see for a while. Is now you truly, because web components, this acceptance for them is getting so wide, you could truly build your complex UI components in Angular and run them in any framework. And the interaction is a nice, simple API. It's just the DOM.
That would be cool.
So, yeah, it would be so cool. Like, we've been dealing with this thing with ngdoc where we're trying to use an IntelliSense, like an autocomplete control that creates tags. And I evaluated several different ones. None of them worked great. We used this one by the Prime Faces people that they produced a great one, but it has some features missing some features we wanted. So I had somebody, Jesse Sanders, who was on the show a while ago from Prebug. He's been doing a whole bunch of help developing it. And he's like, hey, this autocomplete over here is a lot better. So I said, okay, let's use this. And he put it in and he's like, hey, the keyboard navigation doesn't work on this thing. He's like, oh, he says, well, I found this other one, this Prime Faces one. This one looks pretty cool. And I'm like, dude, that's the one you literally just tore out. But he found an add-in for it. Yeah,
that's
he found
awesome.
an add-in for it that adds the feature that we were missing, the ability to inline add new tags. But it's a great example of, I mean, this was built specifically for Angular. They have 5 versions of the same control for other frameworks. They had to rewrite the same thing for every other framework. If you look at Infragistics, they got different versions, or Kendo, they got different versions, right, for every framework. Right. If you could write those once, the Angular now just becomes the language you write the control in, but the control gets compiled down to just plain old HTML, web compliant HTML that any framework can interact with easily. All of a sudden, I think that changes the game pretty seriously.
Yeah, I think it makes it more, it's like one of the, rule number 1 that you learn back in the UI UX days of like safe exploration, right? It's taking the UI term of safe exploration, but for a framework. Like it allows somebody to be like, hey, I don't have the time to learn TypeScript or get this whole environment going. But maybe if I wanted to play around with like one Angular component as like an Angular element and put it in my React app, I think it's going to be exciting. I just can't wait until that's fully fleshed out.
Yep. This episode is sponsored by Linode. Linode is offering listeners of this podcast a $20 credit, which is good for 4 free months at their lowest plan. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for $5 a month. You can get your servers in any of their 10 data centers, and their high memory plans start at 16 gigabytes. Get a server running in under a minute. They do hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups, node balancers, Longview, etc. VMs for full control, running Docker containers, encrypted disks, VPNs, etc. You can run a private Git server. They provide native SSD storage, 200 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. They have 24/7 friendly support, even on holidays, and a 7-day money-back guaranteed. So go check them out at linode.com/adventures in Angular. All right, I'm going to push this along here. Another one, Satish brought up, they use Angular 1 material, and Angular material 2 just isn't mature.
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
I mean, granted, I haven't developed Angular 2 in the last few months, but a year ago when I was doing ngdoc, oh my gosh, Angular 2 material was like 10% of the way that Angular 1 material was. So
yeah,
I'm really down with that point.
It's still, there's some rough patches. That's one of the exciting things for me though. Like, oh, look, there's holes. Like, let's help fill them, because I was even helping on like clean up some of their documentation for material, because they were showing off one of the like things that you could do with it, but the styles on that page were broken. And so I was like, oh, let's make a pull request for that. Cause if you're showing off a feature, but everything around it is broken, it's kind of, I don't know, not too trustworthy in that feature itself. So for me, it's exciting because I'm like, oh, look at all these fun things we can work on and add to. But I guess, if you're looking at it going, should I use this? It doesn't look, even to this day, there's still holes that need filled. So
right. So
valid.
So have you looked at it recently to see how many of the Angular 1 controls are still missing from the Angular 2 version of material?
In November I was looking at it, and they were working fast on it, but it was still missing some. So I haven't looked at it this month, but that's the thing, is how fast they're moving. To me, it would almost be not worth it to start off with the first material, because I would be so excited by looking at like, look how fast they're moving. And once they do a feature parity, I know they're going to do some pretty cool things after that. So I don't know. Right,
but that doesn't help today if you need a control that they don't have.
That's true. That's true.
And you need it in material.
I should look at the list of components, see what they have.
So I've heard of some crazy things of people building brand new Angular 2 apps, and they're doing basically a migrated hybrid Angular 1 app just so they can use the Angular 1 material components in their Angular 2 app. Yep.
No way.
Yeah, totally valid tactic.
Is it?
If that's what I don't want to discuss the wisdom of it overall. Because, hey, if you need the features, you need the features. You might just suffer some performance problems, but if you need the feature, if you got to have that control, like how many man hours goes into writing a really good autocomplete control? It could be a ton. I mean,
yeah.
Most developers have ended up building a couple for them, in the life of if they're front-end developers, right, have built already a couple, and they're always really simple ones compared to the big production ones that come out by companies like Infragistics and Progress. So, I don't know. I totally get the idea of, there's so many features. I mean, we're doing the same thing with ngdoc. That autocomplete tag control, I would not want to write that by hand. It would take several weeks. It would still suck worse than the existing ones. Have way more bugs,
Yeah.
This one's in July. I'm looking at a comparison chart of Angular and Angular 2, but it looks like they only put things on the chart that both of them had. So never mind. Have you guys found? I'm like trying to find a list real quick to see what's still missing. on Material too.
Yeah, well, we can come back to that too, but it is interesting. Okay. I mean, if you're relying on a particular feature or library or integration and it's not there, I mean, that makes sense to me.
It's definitely an issue. I think that's a very valid issue to stay with AngularJS.
Well, and how long have they been working on it? I mean, granted, it's, you know, it takes time to build this stuff, but yeah. I mean, Angular 2 has been out for quite a long time, so.
Right.
Let's see. The next one is the lifespan of our website exceeds the framework. As often is the case with corporate beasts, changing existing code is cost and risk to fix what ain't broke. So yeah, and this is something that I've run into with some of my projects. I have a few things out there that they're out there, they work. I don't really want to go fiddle with them again. So
if I wasn't actively building a project, I wouldn't upgrade it from AngularJS to Angular or to Vue or to anything else because it's on AngularJS. You know, the web is backwards compatible. The web is never going to get backwards compatible broken. So it's fine. Leave it. It'll run forever. That app will run forever. So just leave it the way it is. There's no reason to go crazy.
Yep. Another tweet. I don't know if I completely understand this. It says, even I would love to find out why Google supports AngularJS 1.x. Ask them remove to browser supports so that every organization will force developer to move 1, 2, $4, 5, anything, which is good for both of us. I hope I answered your question.
So I think what it sounds like is this person is saying Google should remove support for AngularJS. The browser should force people to leave AngularJS. Yeah. Which is a horrible idea, but that's what it sounds like. Or that person is saying they're worried that will happen. Neither thing could ever possibly happen. First off, Google doesn't have that kind of control. They only control Chrome, so I guess they could somehow make it so that Chrome doesn't support Angular, but the web supports Angular, and they would certainly never do it. They would never change Chrome to not support Angular.
Right.
The web is backwards compatible. It will always support AngularJS. So
I agree with you. Issue. I completely agree with you. The next one is, I moved and I regret it. Performance isn't better, and complexity is insanely more.
Complexity, yes. Performance is only not better if you are not doing anything in AngularJS that would cause a performance problem, which was much easier to do in AngularJS. You could do, if you did 10 things in AngularJS, one of them is going to cause a noticeable performance problem. Well, I mean, and granted, that's kind of, let me give you a more concrete example. I taught a workshop to about 80 people, 90 people, and I was giving a talk. That's what I was doing. I was giving a talk, and I asked the audience, about 80, 90 people, how many people were using AngularJS seriously, and about 90% of the hands went up. And then I said, okay, how many of you felt like we needed Angular 2 before it got announced? And this talk was given quite a while before, just shortly after Angular 2 was announced. And I was giving these talks on, hey, let's look forward and see what Angular 2 is going to be like. So of those 90 people that had raised their hands, 90% of the people, how many of them thought they needed Angular 2? Only a few hands stayed up. Most of them felt like AngularJS was just great. Mm-hmm. But then I asked them, all right, put all your hands back up who are using it significantly. How many of you have encountered a serious performance problem with Angular 1 at the time? And like a third of the hands stayed up, almost half. Right. So this is a serious number of people that encounter serious performance problems with AngularJS. Now, with Angular, you can encounter serious performance problems, but it's so much harder to do something that will cause a performance problem that it's not so much a matter of, hey, the performance is better or worse. It is, but it depends on how you look at it. The reality is you're going to see similar performances out of the two frameworks if you're doing a very limited set of things in AngularJS. There's a few things that will cause radically horrible performance problems. They're not that hard to do. A lot of people will encounter this issue, but a lot of people won't. Mm-hmm. But for AngularJS, the number of people that are going to encounter performance issues is a very, very, very small number in comparison.
I see. So you're saying if you've never experienced performance issues, jumping over, you might not notice what you're gaining.
I agree. Yeah, totally. I would totally say that that's true. I don't think you're going to take a fairly simple like to-do app or even like ngdoc. I don't know exactly how many lines of code that we have, but ngdoc is not a huge project by any means. It's like 4 pages, and a lot of the code is server side, right? I think we could write that in AngularJS and see exactly the same performance. So much of the performance that we have is about download size. It's about the servers that we're using. So long as you're not downloading some code that's just churning and chugging through stuff, right? But if you get into infinite scrolls, oh, you would never want to do an infinite scroll with AngularJS. There's all kinds of problems and tons of workarounds where people were undoing the bindings as you scrolled them off the page. They had to manually unhook all these bindings.
Oh yeah, we did have some fun with that at my last job. That was fun. You're right.
Or
okay, so
big grids with lots of rows with lots of elements within them that you wanted them to be editable. Oh no.
Okay.
So those are just examples. 2 examples. Yeah. 2 examples of things where you just cause your AngularJS to grind to a halt. Yeah, performance is not a very clear thing. It's the same thing as people saying, "Oh, React is so fast," right? When it was just React and AngularJS were people were starting to leave AngularJS and go to React. Oh, it's so fast. And other people would be like, "What are you talking about? My Angular app is already so there's no performance problems whatsoever." And they're like, "Well, look at this thing that I did." And I'm like, "Well, why would I would never do that. You're putting together the scenario that proves that it's fast in that scenario, but I've never needed to do that scenario, right? Like I've never had to do an infinite scroll list. So none of the apps I've ever built needed that. So why would I care?" Right? And that was a very valid point for the people that were on one side, and for the people that were moving to React who had the problems in AngularJS, it was very valid for them to say, "Hey, we're having all these performance problems. We were doing all this complex tuning. We went to React. We just didn't have to do it because everything just worked fast. We didn't have to do any tuning."
Mm-hmm.
So the same thing with Angular. If you're going to move to it, you're going to find that you don't have to performance tune nearly as much, right?
That makes sense. We've been talking for quite a while. I still have a whole bunch of tweets, so I'm going to kind of pick and choose some of these. The next one is recently worked on a moderately complex web app with a short turnaround. Several of the devs on the team already knew Angular 1, none knew 2+.
Right. So I think we've already kind of addressed this one, right? Like it's totally valid.
Yeah.
When it's time to get some stuff out, go with it. Over time, that'll be less and less valid. More and more people are going to get different skill sets and not have an AngularJS skill set. So it's more valid today than it will be in 3 years. That's for sure.
Yeah, I guess. I guess are we still though at the point where it's easier to find AngularJS developers over Angular developers?
Oh, I think there's no doubt about it. It's still easier to find AngularJS. Now, the question is it easier to find somebody who wants to do AngularJS?
That is an excellent yes. That's the perfect one you should be asking, because there's so many. There were a lot of JS posts, but how many did I actually want to apply to? Because I just wanted to be onto the new stuff, but the companies themselves weren't ready to. So.
Yeah. The next one is server-side rendering of templates with PHP. Need to set a lot of JS variables from PHP. Couldn't find that in 2+.
Wait, server-side rendering.
Server-side rendering variables. Can you say it again? Sorry.
I think I might just try and copy and paste this.
Okay. Thank you.
Because this is a problem I haven't run into. I mean, the bundle size has gotten a lot better.
All right. So he starts off with need to set lots of variables, JS variables with PHP. On that one, and he couldn't find it in 2+. On that specific point, I'm 99.9% confident this could totally be done in Angular 2+. It was just a matter of them figuring out how to do it, right?
Yeah.
The fact that Angular 2+ is compiled doesn't mean that you can't set the variables in a server-side template rendering. You just you only render certain things, right? So, but it's totally doable. Okay. Pretty depending on what they're trying to do. If they're trying to do like some dynamic components, then what they need is elements, and they'd have to switch how they're doing it and move more of that to the client side. So that one, it would really depend on exactly what they're doing. The next one, bundle sizes is huge, and lazy loading is not up to the mark. So that's 2 points. Bundle sizes is huge. Chuck, you were saying, well, bundle size has been coming down.
Yep.
Right. And I agree that bundle size is coming down, but I also agree that there's no doubt about the fact that an AngularJS's bundle size is likely to be significantly smaller than an Angular bundle size, right? Like, yes, I've seen, you could take a CLI app, brand new CLI Hello World app, and the bundle size is like 50 or 60K. It's tiny, right? But the minute you put in routing and forms and those aspects of the framework, just the typical stuff that you really need in a small, and put a small app, like ngdoc.io is a small app, okay? And it was at a 1.8 megabyte bundle size. We just got it down to, I think, 1.2 because we upgraded from 2 to 5. And that actually saw a significant decrease. Yeah, like 30%. But still, it's let me tell you, I'm running it right now. 1.2 megabytes as it is right now. And I know that I could write the same app in AngularJS and have a bundle size of around 2 to 300K.
Yeah.
Maybe 400K, but significantly smaller. So I think that's very valid. Bundle size is huge. Lazy loading, not up to the mark. I don't know. I guess compared to AngularJS, AngularJS doesn't even support lazy loading inherently. You have to use some weird cobbled on add-on that causes its own performance problems. So that's probably only valid in comparison maybe to other frameworks. But so far as I know, AngularJS's lazy loading is just as effective and useful and easy to use.
The main question was
React.
comparing AngularJS and Angular. So
right. Yeah, so compared to AngularJS, lazy loading is a gazillion times better in Angular. So from that standpoint, that's definitely, I don't know, I'd like to ask this person a question and say, what do you mean? Because I just find that to be like wild. Like it's similar to saying, well, it doesn't use TypeScript as effectively as AngularJS does, right? That's probably the opposite is true.
Right.
TypeScript leads to typing a lot and compiling every time if you change a word, even lots of time wasted. Yeah, well,
I've run into that some too.
With the newest changes with the CLI, the compile time is much faster. So that's constantly getting faster. It does have a higher compile time than AngularJS, but that's because it's also doing more during compile rather than the JIT process that AngularJS uses. So that's questionable. And I think we're reaching some time parity on that one. TypeScript leads to typing a lot. That's true, but a lot of people use TypeScript with AngularJS. And you're trading off the typing for finding more bugs in development. So even though I'd say the point is true that TypeScript leads to typing more,
but I don't even, does it do the typing? Because so now that I'm making the switch, right, to like finally use 2 and all the things, I actually was like, okay, Alyssa, download VS Code. You're a good girl because you gotta stop fighting it. So I downloaded it, and then I got, all of the, what are they called? The packages? Or I don't know what they're called. In Atom, they're called packages, but the essential, like, add-ons that you need for Angular and TypeScript and blah, blah, blah. And so once I did that, there's also, like, a bajillion, like, Dan Wallin and who else? John Papa, of these, like, Angular snippet library package things that you download that they've already created, that they use themselves, and it's, like, a snippet, right? Like you type it and it like will fill in the rest. So to me, I was like, oh, wow, this is a lot less typing than I had imagined, because I mean, you can autofill as much as you want to autofill, right? Like you never have to type a full class out again. I don't really get the typing part. Do you? Because like,
well, I mean, again, if you're using snippets are independent of TypeScript. So if you're using lots of snippets, it really doesn't even, you could say, well, I had a ton of snippets for AngularJS and I don't have them for Angular now. Well, go make your snippets, right? Like, so I'm not sure about how snippets. Is TypeScript definitely, is it more typing? Yes. With snippets, is it the same? Potentially. It's potentially the same. But it's definitely more ceremony around the code because the annotation of the types. Even if you only annotate just your construction parameters. That's the only thing that you do is annotate those, right? Is it more typing? Yeah, it's more typing, a little bit more. You don't have to use any other features of TypeScript with Angular other than the type annotations for the constructors, right?
Right.
So it's a small amount of force.
At the end of the day, it still is more, but it's, in my opinion, negligible.
Right. And other than people that hate TypeScript for the pure fact of it's like the TypeScript versus JavaScript, I still think that it's fairly close to being objectively true that using a typed language is better than using the dynamic language. That the few times that the dynamic language is advantageous. I mean, even Facebook is Flow. They're pushing Flow really hard. Angular and TypeScript. With other languages, even React a little bit now, this Reason ML is becoming more and more popular. Elm has really inspired a lot of people with and caused this Reason ML to become a more popular thing, where it's an Elm-like, it's ML language, but people use it with React, or you can use it. It's kind of like a TypeScript thing. It compiles down to ES5, I guess. So I think by and large, we're seeing that a lot of people are realizing the value and benefits of the typing outweigh any of the drawbacks, right? So I don't agree with TypeScript being an issue with going to Angular if it's because you can use it in both, and it's in my opinion fairly objectively a benefit overall.
Yeah, the tooling is much better with TypeScript, and it makes a lot of this a lot easier. And then the syntax is so much easier to follow, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess to play devil's advocate, there's a lot of people, though, who still, they don't use anything like that. They just use JavaScript. And I'm talking to them and convincing them that the tooling is worth it, or that in the end, it saves you from yourself unless they're willing to actually try it. I don't think you can really tell someone those features. And I think there's a big chunk of people out there in the front end who still aren't sold on, Reason or or TypeScript or any of them. So I
agree with that, but I feel like that's more of a style choice, right? It's not if we want to keep this to the realm of, I prefer red over blue, well, then how can you say anything other than I'm going to stick with red, right?
Okay.
But when you're saying, hey, I prefer this objective thing over that objective thing, now we're getting into a realm where I feel like the idea that, hey, TypeScript is a bad thing, is worse, is probably a difficult position to defend. Other than coming back to, I just like JavaScript better, which is fine. I respect that. If you just like plain old ES5 JavaScript better, great. But I think most people would agree that ES6 is superior to ES5. The lambdas get rid of all this context problems. Let gets rid of scoping bugs that creep up in your variable declarations and reduce the amount of global variables it create. I mean, there's so many benefits. The few drawbacks are tiny in comparison, and TypeScript just takes it one step further. Or Flow or Reason ML, some type language, they just take it another step further. So it's still far heavily weighed on the benefit side than on the drawback side.
Yep. All right, I'm going to push us to one more, and then we will wrap up the show. And this one is essentially, in fact, let me just scroll back up and find it here. I need widgets, not spas. Angular 2 assumes it owns the whole page. Angular Element should solve it, but meanwhile, I mostly switched to React.
Right. Well, they already know everything. That's exactly the perfect statement and answer. Elements is going to solve it, and it's going to solve it way better than anything else that they've got an option for. As Elements get released here and becomes a widely used thing, it's going to solve it. And so if that's what they need, then just wait for Elements, and you'll have an amazing, awesome solution. And I think we'll see that React quickly comes up with their own version of Elements, and maybe, I don't know if other frameworks will, but I think we're going to see more than one framework produce a solution similar to Elements.
Makes sense. I mean, a lot of the rest of this is just stuff that we've already talked through, so...
Right.
But it's been interesting to just see where people are at and where they're coming from and why they're holding out on Angular 1X or moving on to something else. So anyway, anything else that you all are hearing before we jump into picks?
As to why people are sticking with AngularJS or potential reasons why to stay with AngularJS.
Yeah.
But I think we've kind of solved them. I think there's still a lot of valid reasons to stick with AngularJS. And if I met people who were still at AngularJS, I wouldn't think poorly of them.
You know, I think one thing though is that at all the conferences, all of the Angular conferences, in the last 2 year, like I haven't seen any AngularJS talks. I haven't seen any AngularJS demos. And if AngularJS was still going to be around in the future and actually a valid framework, I feel like we would see, maybe not as many because, you know, Angular is a new hot thing, but I haven't seen any AngularJS talks. And I don't know if that's because all the speakers are more excited about the newness or if it's just because nobody cares anymore or nobody's interested about hearing those kind of talks. So I don't know if you have anything to speak into that, but that is something I've noticed.
Well, as a conference organizer who has to choose talks for this exact same purpose, you know, you're a little bit talking about the tail wagging the dog, right? Like we specifically don't choose AngularJS talks. We chose, I think, one at NGConf, and I see at least other Angular conferences being exactly the same way. They might have one AngularJS related talk, and usually it's about migration, and that's what ours was. And this year, I doubt we're going to have any. We may or may not have one about migration again, but only because it's an Angular 2 topic. It just happens to include AngularJS, but I don't think we're going to see any. But that's because we're reacting to what the public, people who go and attend conferences, what do they want to see, right? That doesn't translate to usage, to what people are actually building in. You know, if you looked at the 2017 State of JS survey, Vue has huge amounts of interest. So if you're doing a conference and you're showing some content about Vue, it's probably going to be pretty heavily attended. But almost nobody's writing Vue production apps, especially in the US. So that doesn't.
I see. So you're saying conference scene doesn't necessarily like equal what's going on in real world apps?
Oh, absolutely, for sure. Okay. I mean, there's a correlation, but it's not 100% direct. That's for certain. It's a lot about what people want to see.
Okay.
You know?
Yeah, I was wondering.
It's the reason that we see, it's the reason why Hostess has such a huge section of the aisle over at Walmart. It's not because it's what's good for us. It's because it's what people want to buy.
Is that an oversight? I mean, should we be serving those folks?
Well, that's one thing I was wondering is, are AngularJS conferences going to crop up now? Because I still have strong love for AngularJS. I see all the benefits that everyone talks about, and I don't know if it's just nostalgia, because that was the first time using AngularJS that I actually understood JavaScript. I was like, oh, I get it. And having that light bulb moment and that magic moment with AngularJS and then continuing to work with it. I mean, I still love that framework. And I know it, like you said, when you create AngularJS apps, you know all the ins and outs and the gotchas and the things you have to watch out for. But even with all of that stuff, I still freaking love it. So I don't know if I'm really actually curious if you foresee anything coming back in the realm of community for AngularJS, or if you think it'll just continue kind of going forward and it'll be kind of a thing of the past.
One of the things we talked about earlier, I think also plays a lot into it, and that is the fact that there's so few features being added to AngularJS, right?
Right.
So there's not nearly as much just to talk about, and there's so many resources that are already out there. If you want to learn AngularJS, there's tons of tutorials and courses and stuff. Everybody's got that pretty well covered.
So you're saying it's almost like the talk on, whatever in AngularJS has already been done, recorded on YouTube, ready for you to watch. So why have a conference about those things kind of thing?
Exactly. Exactly. The amount of innovation that's going on in the AngularJS space is pretty limited. So trying to even find a talk about AngularJS that has a fairly unique take that hasn't already been done, it's unique, that isn't simply just, hey, we did an AngularJS app, and let me tell you about it, right? Outside of that one, we certainly, as organizers, don't see much in the way of submissions for AngularJS talks of people saying, hey, I've got this really awesome thing that I did with AngularJS. Nobody's thought of it before, or people want to hear about this, but there isn't resources out there to go get it. There's not a lot of that. But in the Angular world, there's tons of it. So
okay,
yeah.
So it's you, and it's like a really interesting, I don't know, outlook on conferences, meetups, talks. Like, I feel like, I guess I just always thought it was what is relevant today, but it's really what is hot today. Like what
it is. It's totally
coming.
People are spending their time when they're submitting to conferences. They're worrying about or thinking about the new hotness, right? So that's what they're submitting. So then conference organizers are choosing from a more limited selection, and the attendees are all saying, hey, we want to hear about the hotness. Doesn't mean anybody's using the hotness, but that's what people are submitting talks on, and that's what they want to hear about.
So you think, okay, for real, if you had a conference that was like, here's what we do in our everyday like JavaScript life, you think nobody would want to attend because it'd be like, ew? Or do you think
that's probably too big of a statement?
Yeah, but I mean, you have to look at it from the sense also with these conferences as far as marketing goes, right? I mean, essentially they're picking the headlines. And if they can pick the headlines, people are going to go, oh, I want to see that, or I want to know about that, as opposed to the things that, aren't. I mean, if you're talking about what I do every day, I already know that. That's old news. That's boring. And so, but if you put up some, sexy new headline about how I can, mine Bitcoin with my Angular 2 or Angular 5, then, I mean, that's like, wow, and am I ever going to do that? Well, probably not. But it's cool and it's interesting, and that's what's going to get me to click.
It kind of makes me want to try a conference or even a meetup that's called like The Basics, and essentially no talks are allowed that are, an RC or even cutting edge, like
boring JS.
We don't want any of that. It's like what has been done. Yeah, we want to hear about that. Like,
well, it's not just the basics. I mean, the basics are appealing to people because everybody's constantly learning, that like, I want to see a basic talk about Vue. Everybody wants that, right? But you're talking about, it's not just the basics. This is stuff you already know, right? And again, do people want to go and hear about stuff they already know? How hard would you push your boss to send you to a conference that's going to have talks on stuff that you aren't 100% sure is going to be valuable for your career next year, right?
I see. So that's why Bleeding Edge is so popular, because if you get it now, even I think the painful part comes in though with like I don't know if you guys, I know you both have worked on something that, then the next release was totally different. But
yep.
Okay. Well, thank you.
People hate it, but they still, we hated it all day long. But as developers, we're still constantly pushing that.
Yeah.
Well, one other thing that
it kind of seemed like a paradox.
Yeah. One other thing I want to push on here too is that, I mean, the Angular 1 stuff is eventually going to decline. I've worked in the Rails community for a long time, and Rails 3 was a big departure from Rails 2. Rails 4 was a big departure from Rails 3, and there were a couple of minor releases in 4 and 5 that were, had pretty big changes. Just moving along. And now, if you're maintaining a Rails 3 or a Rails 2 app, a lot of those libraries are, you have to go and actually hunt them down. And it's just kind of a different thing. And I think eventually, as, Angular continues to move up and people move on from AngularJS, be it to Vue, React, or Angular, we're going to start to see a decline too in the supported libraries around Angular 1. And so you'll find an old version and, now we know that this part of it's a bad idea. So, but nobody's around to update it anymore.
And even more than, AngularJS, like needing those libraries and external dependencies, I feel like React is way more on the, we don't have a whole environment. We're just a library. So
Mm-hmm.
it's hard for me to see. I know it's super hard right now. I saw all the surveys, but it's hard for me to see things that do rely on outside sources that can become deprecated at a moment's notice. It's hard for me to see those being like for the long haul. So I know everybody's on board right now, but I'm just like, how long is it going to be? But maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, but the difference is that with React, there are several incumbents that have a large enough community around them that even if, Dan Abramoff decides I'm not going to Redux anymore, and I don't know if he still maintains it or not because I haven't looked, but let's say that he decides he's not going to do it anymore, or something happens to him to where he can't maintain it anymore. There are enough other people out there using it currently to where it would continue to go on. And it's only if something better came out, or Redux itself started to decline for whatever reason, would you start to have problems finding somebody else to pick up the torch. And I think that's what Joe was saying about Angular 1 at this point, AngularJS, is that right now there's still enough people out there using it to where maintenance would continue because there's that movement. But the satellite plugins and things like that, not everybody in the AngularJS community are using those. And so if they don't have a large enough diaspora of people who are going to go in and back it may wind up falling off a cliff, so to speak, as far as maintenance goes. And then as people need it, then they either contribute their own changes to it that get accepted in, or they wind up forking it and people wind up using the forks. And I've seen both of those happen in other open source communities that are older and have gone through some of the transitions we're seeing now with Angular.
Right.
Very cool. Well, very interesting show, I think.
Yep, and hopefully it gives some folks some ideas too, depending on where you're at in, AngularJS or Angular or transitioning or whatever, I think some of these things that people brought up are completely valid. And I think some of them, people need to explore them a little more deeply and just really see what the trade-offs are and how much work it's going to be.
Yep.
All right, well, let's go ahead and do the picks.
Do you run your own freelance business? Or maybe you're thinking about picking up some business on the side? Well, then you need FreshBooks. FreshBooks is the quickest and easiest way to get invoices out to your clients. It's easy to use. It works anywhere, available from any device, on the desktop, iPhone, iPad, Android, and all of your data is backed up and secure. And it makes it really easy to get organized and get paid. You'll be tracking time, logging expenses, and invoicing your clients in no time. You can also save time billing, freeing up several days per month to focus on the work that you love, and you get paid faster. FreshBooks customers are paid on average 5 days faster because there's a link on the invoice that says pay me now. And it's a great way to grow your business. Plus, FreshBooks is offering a 30-day trial. That's right, 30-day trial if you try them out. So go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section. Once again, for a 30-day trial, go to gofreshbooks.com/devchat and enter devchat in the How Did You Hear About Us section.
Joe, do you want to start us off with picks?
Okay. So I recently watched the big Netflix film Bright with Will what's his name?
Will Wheaton?
Not Will Wheaton. No.
It sounded like that's who you were saying.
I know. That's who I was about to say. Oh my gosh, I can't. Will Smith. There we go. Will Smith.
Oh, that Will.
Right? A totally different Will.
Totally different Will than Will Wheaton. Anyway, it's the biggest budget Netflix show ever produced. They spent $90 million making it.
Holy moly.
And it's met very mixed reviews. I actually thought it was fun. Thought it was a nice show. They made it a bit too R-rated unnecessarily for my taste. Too much swearing, and there's a little bit of female nudity in it that I thought was all unnecessary personally. So wasn't really happy about that. But overall, I thought it was a nice, fun show. Was it amazing? No. Tons of other stuff they've done has been far more amazing. But still think it was worth the watch if you're okay tolerating those things. My other pick...
It was a movie or a show?
Movie, like an hour and 50 minutes or something like that movie. It's kind of basically a D&D or like Lord of the Rings meets Training Day. It's like a cop procedural show with
wow, this sounds awesome.
Lord of the Rings twist. It sounds awesome. It definitely didn't live up to the potential, but it was still worth it. I enjoyed it. It was worth watching, but it did not live up to the potential for sure. But I did enjoy it. So I'm going to pick that. And then my other pick is going to be the series, The Travelers. Season 2 just barely came out. I'm so excited to start watching. I haven't started watching it yet, but super excited to start watching that. Loved season 1. Thought it was just as unique and interesting an idea, almost, at least to Stranger Things, and almost as good of a implementation as Stranger Things. You know, for me, I've enjoyed it almost as much as I enjoyed watching Stranger Things. So really liked it. Very excited. So those are my picks.
Yeah, I really enjoyed Travelers. I didn't know it was coming out. That's awesome. Alyssa, what are your picks?
I just have one, and that is the upcoming. Well, I don't know if does it count as upcoming, Joe. I was going to say NGConf is upcoming, but
it's definitely upcoming.
It's so many months out. I don't know if upcoming counts, but I'm super pumped about it, and so I want everyone to come, please. Cometh to the NGConf. So do you
tickets
know
are still on sale.
When today was cut off? The ticket sales?
The ticket sales? Well,
yeah, when is it?
Out.
Oh, okay. It's not. You're not going to be like, okay, if you don't get it by this date, you don't get one. That's not.
Oh, no. No, but I mean, tickets, who knows when tickets will sell out? I could tell you there's enough right now, but because we're about to hit the new year, we could see a serious ramp up in the ticket sales, especially once we announce the speakers, that if you wait too long, you're very likely to not be able to get a ticket.
Gotcha.
I'm sure tickets will sell out. So
yes, my pick is the NGConf.
Awesome. I'm going to jump in here with a couple of picks. One related to this episode was pretty early on the tweet that I put out there that got all these responses. And thanks to everybody who replied. JavaScript Daily retweeted it, and that got a lot of traction on it. And so I'm going to just kind of publicly thank them. I know Peter Cooper runs the company behind it. But anyway, great stuff. And then I'm also going to pick, just as kind of a public service announcement for this show, I do a parallel show where I interview past guests and, hosts and other people in the Angular community. It's My Angular Story. And if you're subscribed to the All Angular podcast feed from devchat.tv, then that will, that'll get you both of the shows. But if you're not, then go on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts and check out My Angular Story. I've been interviewing a bunch of interesting people lately. I think the most recent interview that I've done to date is Austin McDaniel. But,
you just did that one, didn't you?
Yeah, we just released it.
Nice.
So, yeah, we're putting those out. So if you're interested, definitely check that out. And if you are looking at Vue or React as possible alternatives to Angular, then I am working with Joe on a Vue podcast that follows this format. And I am working with a few other people on a React podcast that also follows this framework. And you can find Indiegogo campaigns for those, and we'll put links to that in the show notes. And that's all I've got. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and we will catch everyone next week.
Bandwidth for this segment is provided by CacheFly, the world's fastest CDN. Deliver your content fast with CacheFly. Visit CACHEFLY.com to learn more.